$2 silver. That's all it took to change everything. In 1873 Montana, when Callum Hayes slapped those coins onto the auction block for the bride no man wanted, the crowd didn't just laugh. They howled. A broken rancher buying broken goods. But what they didn't see was the fire still burning behind Elara Wynn's downcast eyes, or the desperate hope clawing at Callum's chest. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive on a white horse. Sometimes it comes dusty, unwanted, and worth exactly $2. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The auction block smelled of sweat, tobacco, and desperation. Callum Hayes stood at the back of the crowded saloon, his hat pulled low, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Around him, Montana's finest, and by finest, he meant the loudest, the drunkest, and the most prosperous, jostled for position, their eyes gleaming with the particular hunger of men who'd been without female companionship for far too long. The mail-order brides had arrived that morning on the westbound train, a collection of hopeful women seeking new lives in a harsh land. One by one, they'd been introduced to the assembled men, though introduced was a generous word for what amounted to livestock evaluation, with slightly better manners. Callum had watched 5 women find matches already. The pretty blonde with the musical laugh had gone to Banker Morrison for $300. The sturdy German woman with capable hands had fetched $250 from the blacksmith. Even the widow with 3 children had found a taker, old Jensen, who needed help with his failing eyesight and didn't mind a ready-made family. But now, as the afternoon sun slanted through the saloon's grimy windows, only one woman remained. "Gentlemen!" hollered Silas Pettigrew, the auctioneer, his face already flushed red from whiskey and excitement. "We've saved the best for last." The comment drew snickers from the crowd. Everyone could see this was a lie. The woman who stepped onto the platform moved like she was walking to her own execution. She was thin, too thin, Callum thought, with dark hair pulled back so severely it seemed to hurt. Her dress, once probably a respectable gray, had been mended so many times it was more patched than original fabric. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white. "This here is Miss Elara Wynn," Silas continued, his enthusiasm notably dampened. "Age 26, can read and write, says she's good with numbers, and she looks half dead already," someone shouted from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the room. Callum felt his hands curl into fists. Now, Silas said, though he was grinning too. "She's just traveled a long way, that's all. Came all the way from Boston, didn't you, miss?" Elara gave the barest nod, still not raising her eyes. "Boston," another voice called out. "Probably some fancy lady who can't even milk a cow. Or cook a decent meal. Look at those hands, soft as butter. What use is that out here?" Callum studied those hands. They were trembling. "Let's start the bidding at $100, Silas announced, his voice lacking conviction. Silence answered him. The woman on the platform seemed to shrink further into herself, if such a thing were possible. Callum noticed the almost imperceptible way her shoulders hunched, the slight tremor in her lower lip before she caught it between her teeth. "Come on, gentlemen," Silas cajoled. "She's educated. That's worth something, ain't it?" "Can she birth calves?" someone yelled. "Can she shoot? Can she survive a winter?" More laughter. Elara's face had gone pale as milk, but she still didn't look up, didn't defend herself. There was something in that stillness that caught at Callum's chest. Not weakness, but rather a kind of terrible practiced endurance. $75, Silas tried, desperation creeping into his voice. Nothing. 50? The silence grew uncomfortable. Men shifted on their feet, suddenly finding their boots fascinating. This wasn't fun anymore. It was cruel, and even the hardest men in the room could feel it. Callum knew what happened to unclaimed mail-order brides. The lucky ones got sent back east, though the journey cost money most didn't have. The unlucky ones, well, there were establishments in towns like this that would take a woman with nowhere else to go, and once a woman went into one of those places, she rarely came out. He looked at Elara Wynn's bowed head, at the rigid set of her spine, and saw himself. Saw the same desperate pride that had kept him standing when his cattle died, when the drought came, when his wife left him for a silver mine owner with prospects. The same stubborn refusal to break that had sustained him through 3 years of failure. She was still standing. That had to count for something. $25? Silas's voice had gone quiet. Anyone? Callum's hand moved to his pocket before his brain could catch up. His fingers found the coins there, all the money he had left in the world until he could sell his next steer, if he had a next steer to sell. 4 silver dollars. His supply money. His emergency fund. His last buffer against complete destitution. Going once, he should save it. He should be smart. He should walk away. Going twice, but smart hadn't gotten him anywhere, had it? Smart had lost him everything. Maybe it was time to try something else. Maybe it was time to try desperate. $2. His voice cut through the saloon like a gunshot. Every head turned. Silas's mouth fell open. And for the first time since stepping onto that platform, Elara Wynne raised her eyes. The laughter started almost immediately, great roaring waves of it that shook the rafters and sent men slapping their knees in delight. $2. Did he say $2? Hell, I'd pay more for a lame horse. Hayes has finally lost what's left of his mind. Callum ignored them all. He was looking at Elara, and she was looking back, and in her dark eyes he saw something flicker, surprise, maybe, or confusion, or perhaps the faintest spark of something that might have been hope before she remembered to kill it. Silas sputtered, his face cycling through several shades of red. Now see here, Hayes, this is a human woman we're talking about, not a sack of— $2 is my bid, Callum interrupted, his voice steady. That enough to meet your reserve, or do I need to find 2 bits more? The auctioneer looked helplessly at the crowd, at Elara, at his empty cash box. The organizers of these bride auctions took a commission, and even $2 was better than nothing, which is exactly what he'd get if the woman went unclaimed. This is highly irregular, Silas muttered. So is auctioning human beings, Callum replied quietly. But here we are. A few of the laughs died in men's throats. Uncomfortable truth had that effect. Anyone else? Silas made one last attempt, scanning the crowd. Anyone at all willing to bid on Miss Wynne? $3? Anyone? The silence that answered was absolute. Fine. Silas slumped in defeat. Sold to Callum Hayes for $2. God help you both. Callum walked forward through the parting crowd, very aware of the eyes on him, the whispers starting to buzz like flies. He pulled the 2 silver dollars from his pocket, his last $2, leaving him with exactly 2 more to his name, and placed them on the money box with a solid clink. Up close, Elara was taller than he'd thought, nearly reaching his shoulder. Her eyes, now that he could see them properly, were a deep brown flecked with gold, and they held a wariness that went bone deep. She looked at him like he was a puzzle she didn't trust, a trap she couldn't quite identify. Ma'am, he said, touching the brim of his hat. She didn't respond, just watched him with those careful, calculating eyes. Mr. Hayes, Silas was saying, pushing papers across the makeshift desk. You'll need to sign here, and I can read, Callum said shortly, scanning the documents. Standard marriage contract, binding under territorial law, granting Elara Wynne to him as his lawful wife in exchange for the agreed-upon sum. His stomach turned slightly at the language, granting like she was property, but he signed anyway. What choice did either of them have? When he straightened, holding out the pen to Elara, she stared at it like it might bite her. You need to sign too, he said gently. If you're willing. Willing, she repeated, and her voice was rough from disuse but cultured, educated. Boston, he remembered. That's an interesting word for it. You don't have to, he said, and meant it. If you'd rather take your chances elsewhere, I won't. Elsewhere. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Yes, my many other options. She took the pen. Her hand shook as she signed her name in neat, precise script. Elara Margaret Wynne. Then, after a pause, she added Hayes to the end of it. Just like that, she was his wife. The crowd was already dispersing, losing interest now that the entertainment was over. Callum heard their comments anyway, the speculation about how long she'd last, the jokes about what $2 could buy these days, the mock sympathy for the poor bastard who'd just made the worst investment of his life. Where's your belongings? Callum asked. Alara gestured toward the corner where a single battered valise sat. That was it. Everything she owned in the world, apparently, fit in one small bag. He picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, and nodded toward the door. My wagon's outside. She followed him in silence, moving with a careful precision that suggested every step hurt. How long had she been traveling? How long since she'd had a proper meal, a real bed? The Montana afternoon hit them like a wall of heat and light after the saloon's dimness. Callum's wagon, and that was a generous word for the rickety collection of wood and wheels he'd cobbled together, waited at the hitching post, his old mare Bess dozing in the traces. He helped Alara up onto the seat, noting how light she was when his hand circled her waist, how fragile her bones felt through the worn fabric of her dress. She settled herself with that same careful precision, arranging her skirts, folding her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead at nothing. Callum climbed up beside her and took the reins. Before he could signal Bess to move, a rider pulled up alongside them. Barrett Cole sat astride a magnificent black stallion, his expensive suit dusty from the road, but still marking him as the richest man in 3 counties. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were cold as January. "Hayes," he said affably, "heard you made quite the purchase in there." "Mr. Cole," Callum's jaw tightened. $2. Cole shook his head in mock amazement. "Have to admire your economy. Was there something you wanted?" "Just wanted to remind you that my offer still stands. $500 for your land. That's more than fair, considering its current condition." "And I'll remind you that my answer still stands," Callum replied evenly. "Not for sale." Cole's smile didn't waver, but something mean flickered in his eyes. "Pride's an expensive luxury, Hayes, especially for a man who can only scrape together $2 for a wife." His gaze slid to Alara, dismissive and contemptuous. "Though I suppose you get what you pay for." Callum's hands tightened on the reins. Bess shifted nervously. "My land isn't for sale," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Not now, not ever, not to you. We done here?" Cole studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "For now. But winter's coming, Hayes. Man alone can't survive a Montana winter, especially not with a ranch falling apart around his ears." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Ma'am, welcome to Montana. Hope you survive it." He wheeled his horse and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Beside him, Callum felt Alara take a careful breath. "Friend of yours?" she asked dryly. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Wouldn't say that." "What does he want with your land?" "Water rights. My property's got the only creek for miles that doesn't dry up in summer. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. And you keep refusing." "It's my land," he said simply. "Only thing I got left that's mine." She was quiet for a moment, then, $2 and some land. Quite the empire you've built." He did smile then, brief and rueful. "When you put it like that, I'm starting to see why no one else bid on you. You've got a sharp tongue." "Among my many flaws," she agreed. "I assume you'll be discovering the rest soon enough." Callum clicked his tongue at Bess, and the old mare started forward with a resigned sigh. The town fell away behind them as they headed into open country, the late afternoon sun painting the grasslands gold and amber. They rode in silence for a while. Callum was very aware of the woman beside him, the straightness of her spine despite obvious exhaustion, the way she watched the landscape with keen intelligence, cataloging and assessing. Not admiring, he noticed, evaluating. "How far is it?" she asked eventually. "About an hour's ride. Ranch is up near the foothills." "Ranch?" She tested the word. "How many cattle?" He hesitated. 47 head. Was 80 last year, but the winter was hard. And then the drought. 47 cattle is barely subsistence level." "I know." "And the house?" "Cabin. 2 rooms. It's solid. Keeps the weather out." "Mostly?" He glanced at her. She was still staring straight ahead, but there might have been the ghost of something like amusement around her mouth. "Mostly," he admitted. "And you're working this ranch alone." "Was. Now there's 2 of us." "2 of us," she echoed softly. Then, "Why did you bid on me?" The question hung in the air between them. Callum considered lying, making it sound noble or calculated or anything other than what it was. Didn't seem right, he said finally. What would have happened to you if nobody bid? So you spent your last money on pity. Wasn't pity. He struggled to find the right words. You were still standing. After everything, the journey, the auction, all those men laughing, you were still standing. That's not nothing. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and he met her gaze steadily. I had nowhere else to go, she said quietly. Standing was all I had left. I know the feeling. Something passed between them in that moment. Not understanding, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd reached the end of their ropes and found each other dangling there. What happened to your last wife? Alara asked. He should have expected the question, but it still hit like a punch. Catherine. She left 3 years ago, went to Silver Creek with a man named Thomas Wardell. He owned half the silver mines there. She sent divorce papers 6 months later. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right to leave. I couldn't give her the life she wanted. And what life was that? One that didn't involve choosing between fixing the roof and buying winter feed. One where she didn't have to make her own soap and wear the same 2 dresses until they fell apart. One with possibilities. Alara absorbed this. And what life do you think I wanted, Mr. Hayes? Don't know, but I'm guessing it wasn't this. No, she agreed softly. It wasn't this. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They crested a rise, and there it was. His ranch, such as it was. The cabin hunched against the hillside like something trying to hide, its log walls weathered gray, one shutter hanging crooked. The barn sagged to the left, clearly in need of repairs he couldn't afford. The corral fence had gaps where posts had rotted through. Beside him, he felt Alara go very still. This is it, he said, hating how defeated his voice sounded. I know it's not much. It has walls, she interrupted, and a roof. That's more than I had this morning. He pulled Bess to a stop in front of the cabin and climbed down, then reached up to help Alara. She hesitated for just a moment before placing her hands on his shoulders and letting him lift her down. Up close, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. When did you last eat? He asked. She had to think about it. Yesterday morning, I think. The days have blurred together. Come on. He grabbed her valise and led her to the cabin door. Let's get some food in you. The interior of the cabin was dim and spare. One room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough table with 2 chairs sat near the window. The bedroom door stood open, revealing a simple bed with a patchwork quilt. Alara stood in the middle of the main room, taking it all in with those assessing eyes. The bedroom's yours, Callum said, setting her valise down. I'll sleep out here. She turned to him sharply. This is your home. And you're my wife. Legally, anyway. You should have the bed. Mr. Hayes, Callum, he interrupted. If we're married, might as well use first names. Callum, she corrected herself. I don't expect you to give up your bed for me. This is a business arrangement. We both know what this is. What is it? The question seemed to catch her off guard. I needed a way to survive. You needed what? Help with the ranch? Someone to cook and clean? We made a practical arrangement. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? She lifted her chin defiantly, but he could see the fear underneath, the fear of hoping for anything more and being disappointed. Callum moved to the fireplace and began building a fire, giving himself something to do with his hands. I think, he said carefully, that we both needed something we couldn't name. I think we're both running from things we don't talk about, and I think we just made a promise to each other in that saloon, whether we meant to or not. A promise, she repeated, to try, to not give up, to still be standing when winter comes. The kindling caught, and firelight began to fill the room. Callum stood and faced her. I won't lie to you, Alara. I don't have much to offer. This ranch is failing. I'm in debt. Barrett Cole's circling like a vulture, waiting for me to fall. And I spent my last $2 on a woman I don't know, for reasons I can't fully explain. He paused. But I'm still here, still fighting. And if you're willing to fight too, Then maybe we've got a chance. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her working through it, calculating risks, weighing options, trying to decide if she could trust him even a little bit. Finally, she said, "I'll take the bedroom, but only because I'm exhausted and I'm fairly certain I'll collapse if I don't sit down soon. Tomorrow, we'll establish proper arrangements." Fair enough. He heated some beans and salt pork, nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate in silence, Alara consuming her food with the careful efficiency of someone who'd gone hungry before. When she was done, she looked marginally more human, some color returning to her pale cheeks. "I should—" She gestured vaguely toward the bedroom. "Of course. There's water in the pitcher, extra blanket in the chest if you need it." She stood, swaying slightly, and Callum resisted the urge to steady her. She was already skittish as a colt. He wouldn't add to her discomfort. At the bedroom door, she paused and looked back. "Callum? Yeah? Thank you for the $2. Before he could respond, she closed the door softly behind her. Callum stood alone in the firelight, listening to the small sounds of her moving around the bedroom, the rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed, the long sigh that might have been relief or exhaustion or grief. He'd spent his last money on a woman who didn't trust him, for a ranch that was dying, in a fight he was probably going to lose. But for the first time in 3 years, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Outside, the Montana night settled in, vast and star-filled and full of possibilities, both terrible and wonderful, that neither of them could yet imagine. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Montana hills, painting the world in shades of silver and shadow. Callum woke on the floor near the fireplace, his back aching from the hard boards, and lay still for a moment listening to the silence. The cabin felt different somehow, occupied in a way it hadn't been for years. There was another person breathing behind that closed bedroom door, another heartbeat sharing this space with him. He rose quietly, built up the fire, and put coffee on to boil. The familiar motion steadied him, gave him something to do with the nervous energy thrumming through his veins. What did a man say to a wife he'd bought for $2? What did she expect from him? What did he expect from himself? The bedroom door opened as he was slicing bacon into the pan. Alara emerged looking somehow both better and worse than she had the night before. Better because she'd clearly slept, some of the exhaustion lifted from her features. Worse because the morning light was less forgiving than firelight, highlighting the hollows in her cheeks, the thinness of her wrists, the way her dress hung on a frame that had known hunger. "Morning," Callum said, keeping his voice neutral. "Good morning." She stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure of her place in this new world. "I should be doing that." "Doing what?" "Cooking. Isn't that part of the arrangement?" Callum flipped the bacon, considering his words. "Alara, I didn't buy a servant. I can cook my own breakfast." "Then what did you buy?" The question came out sharper than she probably intended, edged with frustration and confusion. He looked at her directly. "Honestly, I don't know yet, but how about we figure it out together instead of you assuming the worst of me right off?" She blinked, clearly taken aback. Then, slowly, some of the rigidity left her shoulders. "That's fair. I apologize." "No need. Coffee's ready if you want some." They ate breakfast in a silence that was less comfortable than cautious, two strangers learning to orbit each other. Callum watched her from the corner of his eye, noticing how she ate slowly now that she wasn't starving, how she held her coffee cup with both hands as if warming herself, how her gaze kept drifting to the window and the land beyond. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally. "The real situation, not the version you gave those men in town." Callum set down his fork. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. If I'm going to be here, I should understand what we're dealing with." "We." The word hung in the air between them, small but significant. So he told her. About the drought 2 summers ago that had decimated his hay crop. About the brutal winter that followed, when he'd lost half his herd to cold and starvation. About the bank loan he'd taken out to buy feed, the loan that was coming due in 4 months with interest he couldn't pay. About Barrett Cole's relentless offers to buy him out, each one more insistent than the last. About the fence that needed mending, the barn that needed shoring up, the well that was running dry. 47 cattle, she said when he finished. How many do you need to break even? 70, minimum. More if I want to actually turn a profit. And to pay off the loan? Need to sell at least 30 head at good prices. But Cole controls the stockyard in town. He sets the prices, and he's made it clear mine won't be good. Ilara absorbed this, her fingers tapping against her coffee cup in a rhythm that suggested calculation. So you're trapped, can't make enough to pay the loan, can't sell your cattle for fair prices, can't afford to improve the ranch to increase your herd. That about sums it up. And Cole is waiting for you to fail so he can take the land for pennies. He'll get it when the bank forecloses. Probably already has an arrangement with them. Then we need more cattle and a different market. She said it simply, as if solving an impossible problem were merely a matter of logic. Callum almost laughed. Just like that? You said you wanted someone who wouldn't give up. Did you mean it, or was that just talk? The challenge in her voice sparked something in his chest. I meant it. Then show me the ranch, all of it. I need to see what we're working with. He studied her city dress, her soft leather shoes. It's rough country. You'll need different clothes. These are all I have. Catherine left some things in the chest in the bedroom. They might fit. Something flickered across her face, discomfort at wearing another woman's cast-offs, maybe, or pride wanting to refuse. But practicality won. I'll change. When she emerged 15 minutes later, Callum had to revise his assessment of her. Catherine's old work dress was too big in places and too small in others, but Ilara had cinched it with a belt and rolled the sleeves. She'd braided her hair into a single plait down her back and found an old hat somewhere. She looked less like a Boston lady and more like someone who might actually survive out here. Better, he said. Lower your expectations further and you might not be disappointed. But there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. They spent the morning riding the property lines. Callum showed her the creek that ran through the heart of his land, still flowing despite the drought that had dried up the neighbors' water sources. He showed her the grazing pastures, the rough shelter where the cattle bunched during storms, the northern boundary where his land met Cole's vast holdings. Ilara asked questions constantly, her mind clearly working through problems he'd long since accepted as unsolvable. How deep was the creek? Could it support irrigation? What about the southern pasture that lay fallow? Why wasn't he using it? Had he considered breeding his own cattle instead of buying stock? You think like a businessman, he observed as they paused on a ridge overlooking the ranch. My father was a merchant in Boston. I kept his books from the time I was 12. She said it matter-of-factly, but Callum heard the past tense, the story she wasn't telling. What happened to him? He died. Debts I didn't know about came due. I lost the house, the shop, everything. Her jaw tightened. Turns out, I wasn't as clever with numbers as I thought. Or he hid things from you. She glanced at him sharply. Perhaps. Either way, I ended up with nothing and no prospects. A woman alone in Boston with no family and no money has limited options. I could work in a factory for wages that wouldn't cover rent. I could try to find work as a governess with no references, or I could answer an advertisement for mail-order brides. She shrugged. I chose the option that at least offered the possibility of a future, however uncertain. And instead you got me in a failing ranch. Yes. She met his eyes. But I also got land and space and a chance to build something. That's more than I had yesterday. They rode back in thoughtful silence. As they approached the barn, Callum noticed one of the herd cows standing apart from the others, her head down, sides heaving. That's not normal, Ilara said, her voice sharp with concern. No, it's not. Callum dismounted quickly, approaching the cow with slow, careful movements. Up close, he could see the problem, bloat, her stomach distended with trapped gas. If they didn't relieve it soon, she'd die. What's wrong with her? Ilara had dismounted too, standing close enough to help but far enough not to spook the animal. Bloat. She got into the fresh clover by the creek, probably. Ate too much too fast. He was already pulling out his knife, feeling along the cow's side for the right spot. I need to puncture the rumen to let the gas out. Will that kill her? Might, but she'll definitely die if I don't try. What can I do? He looked at her, this city woman in borrowed clothes, and made a decision. Hold her head. Talk to her. Keep her calm. To his surprise, Elara moved without hesitation, positioning herself at the cow's head, her hands gentle but firm as she stroked the animal's neck. "Easy, girl," she murmured. "We're trying to help you. Just stay still now." Callum made the cut quickly, precisely, and gas hissed out with immediate effect. The cow shuddered but didn't bolt, held steady by Elara's calm voice and steady hands. Within minutes, the animal's breathing eased, her sides no longer grotesquely swollen. "She'll be all right?" Elara asked, not letting go. "Should be. I'll need to watch her for infection, but she'll live." Elara finally stepped back, and Callum saw that her hands were shaking slightly, though her face remained composed. "In Boston, I never touched a cow in my life." "You did good." "I was terrified." "Didn't show." She looked down at her hands, now smeared with dirt and God knew what else. "I suppose I'm going to have to get used to being terrified without showing it." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm that was part partnership, part careful dance. Elara proved herself stronger and more adaptable than Callum had dared hope. She took over the cooking and quickly demonstrated that she was better at it than he'd ever been, making their simple provisions stretch further with clever combinations and a light hand with seasonings he hadn't even known he had. But she didn't stop at cooking. She reorganized the cabin with ruthless efficiency, finding places for things that had been scattered, creating order from chaos. She mended his torn shirts with neat, precise stitches. She swept and scrubbed until the cabin actually felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep. And then she asked for the ranch accounts. "The what?" Callum looked up from the harness he was mending. "Your financial records. Ledgers, receipts, loan documents, whatever you have." "There's not much to look at. I know what I owe." "Knowing in your head and seeing it on paper are two different things, please." He showed her the battered notebook where he'd been tracking expenses, the stack of bills and receipts stuffed in a drawer, the loan papers from the bank. Elara spread it all out on the kitchen table and spent the entire evening going through every scrap of paper with fierce concentration. Callum watched her work, fascinated by the transformation. This was where she came alive, bent over columns of numbers, her lips moving silently as she calculated, her pen scratching notes in margins. The careful, defensive woman who'd stepped off that auction block was gone, replaced by someone focused and competent and absolutely in her element. "Your record-keeping is abysmal," she announced finally. "Thanks." "I'm serious, Callum. You've been paying for things twice, losing receipts for expenses you could claim, missing opportunities to reduce costs." She tapped the ledger. "Just in the past 6 months, I found at least $30 in duplicate payments and missed credits." $30? He sat up straighter. "At least. And that's just what I can see from this mess. If you'd been keeping proper books, you'd know exactly where every penny was going." Her eyes gleamed with something like excitement. "Give me a week. Let me organize this properly, and I'll show you exactly where you stand." "A week it is." She worked late into the nights, rebuilding his financial records from scratch. Callum would wake in the small hours to find her still at the table, lamplight casting shadows across her face as she filled page after page with her neat handwriting. He'd make coffee and bring her a cup without speaking, and she'd accept it without looking up, her mind clearly miles deep in calculations. On the 7th day, she presented him with a new ledger, every expense categorized, every income source documented, every debt laid out in stark clarity. "We're worse off than you thought," she said bluntly. His heart sank. "How much worse?" "The loan payment is due in 3 months and 2 weeks, not 4 months. You miscalculated based on a letter from the bank." She showed him the notice. "And there are additional fees you weren't accounting for. The total due is $670, not $600. Callum felt the walls closing in. "I don't have that. Even if I sold every head of cattle at premium prices, which I won't get—" "Let me finish," Elara interrupted. "You're worse off than you thought in some ways, but better in others. You own 3 horses, Bess and 2 others you've been using for working cattle. They're older but sound. At $50 each, that's $150 in assets you didn't account for. You also have equipment that has value. 2 saddles, tools, that wagon, another $75, conservatively. I need those things to work the ranch." "I know. I'm just showing you what you actually have." She turned the page. "More importantly, Your cattle are in better condition than comparable herds I've seen at other ranches we've passed. You've been taking good care of them despite limited resources. That means they should fetch premium prices if we can find the right buyer. Coal controls the market. Coal controls the stockyard in town. But there's a railhead in Silver Creek, 3 days' drive north, and there's a cattle buyer there who works for the Chicago markets. She pulled out a newspaper clipping. Where had she gotten that? According to this, they're paying top dollar for quality beef. Callum stared at the clipping, then at Alara. A 3-day cattle drive with 47 head? That's impossible for 2 people. Then we hire help. With what money? We offer a percentage of the sale. If the cattle sell as well as I think they will, it's worth it. And if they don't, we're no worse off than we are now. He wanted to say it was crazy, that it would never work, that she didn't understand how hard it was to move cattle through mountain passes with an inexperienced crew. But looking at her face, determined, intelligent, absolutely convinced she was right, he found himself believing it might be possible. Even if we pull that off, he said slowly, it's still not enough. We'd be lucky to clear 500 after expenses and hired help. That leaves us short, which is where the southern pasture comes in. She tapped another page in the ledger. You said it's been fallow for 2 years. Why? No good water access. The creek doesn't reach that far. But it could. I've been studying the terrain. If we dig an irrigation channel from the creek bend, we could get water to that entire section. It would take work, hard work, but it's possible. Even if we did that, we couldn't plant and harvest before the loan comes due. We don't need to harvest. We need to show improvement to the property. If we can demonstrate to the bank that we're increasing the ranch's productive capacity, they might extend the loan, especially if we make a partial payment to show good faith. Callum leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. It was risky. It required betting everything on a cattle drive that might fail, on irrigation channels that might not work, on a bank that might not care about improvements. But it was a plan, a real plan, with specific steps and measurable goals, more than he'd had in 3 years of struggling alone. You really think this could work? He asked. I think it's our best chance, maybe our only chance. She met his eyes. But I need to know you're committed. I can't do this alone, and I won't waste my time trying if you're just going to give up halfway through. I told you I don't give up. Then prove it. Let's save this ranch. He extended his hand across the table. Partners? She looked at his calloused, work-worn hand for a moment, then placed her own smaller hand in his. Her grip was firm despite the softness of her skin. Partners, she agreed. The next morning, they began digging the irrigation channel. Callum had expected Elar to supervise or perhaps help in small ways, but she showed up dressed in her oldest clothes with a shovel in hand and determination in her eyes. I can handle this, he said. You don't have to. We're partners, remember? That means we both work. The first hour showed him just how unprepared she was for this kind of labor. Her hands blistered almost immediately. Her back clearly ached from bending. She had to stop frequently to catch her breath, her face flushed with exertion. But she didn't quit. Every time Callum suggested she rest, she shook her head and went back to digging. When her hands started bleeding, she wrapped them in strips of cloth and kept going. When she stumbled from exhaustion, she caught herself and raised the shovel again. Alara, stop, he finally said, catching her arm as she swayed. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm fine. You're bleeding through the bandages and you can barely stand. That's not fine. Mick. She jerked her arm free, her eyes blazing. Don't tell me I can't do this. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying you don't have to destroy yourself to prove something. I'm not trying to prove something, she snapped. Then quieter. Yes, I am. I'm trying to prove I'm not useless out here, that I'm worth more than $2. The words hit him like a physical blow. Is that what you think? That I see you as worth only $2? Isn't that what I cost you? Callum set down his shovel and turned to face her fully. That $2 was all I had. It was every bit of money I possessed in the world. I didn't spend it because you were cheap. I spent it because I had nothing more to give, and you were worth giving everything for. She stared at him, her breath coming fast, dirt smudged across her face, hands wrapped in bloody cloth. You were standing alone on that platform, he continued, facing the worst moment of your life, and you didn't break. You didn't cry or beg or make yourself smaller to please those bastards. You stood there with your head up and your dignity intact, and I thought, there's someone who knows how to fight, someone who won't quit when things get hard. He paused. I spent my last $2 hoping some of that strength might rub off on me. Ilara's eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away. I was terrified. I am terrified. Every moment of every day, I'm afraid I'll fail and prove that everyone who laughed at me was right. Then we're both terrified. We'll just have to be scared together. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh or a sob. Then she was sitting down hard in the dirt, her shoulders shaking, and Callum realized she was crying. Really crying, probably for the first time since she'd arrived. He sat down beside her, not touching, just present, and let her cry herself out. When the storm finally passed, she wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving more dirt streaks. I've ruined your first impression of me. I don't recall asking for perfection. No, you just asked for someone who wouldn't give up. She looked at her bloody, blistered hands. Though my hands might give up before I do. Come on. Callum stood and offered his hand. Let's get those cleaned and bandaged properly. The ditch will still be here tomorrow. She let him pull her to her feet, and they walked back to the cabin together. He heated water, and she sat at the table while he carefully unwrapped her hands, cleaned the wounds, and applied the salve he kept for rope burns and blisters. You did this before, she said quietly. Took care of someone. My wife. My ex-wife. She wasn't built for ranch work either. First few months, her hands looked like this every night. He wound clean bandages around her palms. She tried. I'll give her that. But she hated it. Hated the isolation. Hated the work. Hated what it did to her. He tied off the bandage. Eventually, she hated me for bringing her here. I don't hate you, Ilara said. You might. Give it time. No. She flexed her bandaged hands experimentally. I might hate the work. I might hate the blisters and the dirt and the sheer physical exhaustion of it all, but I won't hate you for offering me a chance to be something more than desperate. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. They worked the irrigation channel for a few hours each morning before the heat became unbearable. Ilara's hands gradually toughened, the blisters becoming calluses, her soft merchant's daughter hands transforming into something more resilient. In the afternoons, Callum taught her to ride properly. Not the side saddle pretense she'd learned in Boston, but real riding for working cattle. She took to it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, falling off half a dozen times before finally staying in the saddle through a gallop. You're a natural, he told her, after she successfully cut a stray cow from the herd. I'm covered in bruises, and my backside has declared war on the rest of my body, she countered. But thank you. In the evenings after supper, they would sit at the table and discuss strategy. Ilara had somehow acquired more newspapers and was tracking cattle prices, weather patterns, anything that might affect their plans. She'd also been asking questions in town during their weekly supply runs, gathering information about who might be willing to work a cattle drive, what the routes north were like, whether anyone else had tried to bypass Cole's stockyard. You're good at this, Callum observed one night. Strategy, planning, seeing angles other people miss. My father used to say that business was just war with different weapons. She looked up from the newspaper she was annotating. Find your opponent's weakness, exploit your own strengths, and never fight fair if you can help it. Sounds like a hard man. He was, but he was also kind in his way. He taught me to think, to question, to never accept limitations just because someone said they existed. Her expression softened. I miss him. Tell me about him. So she did, and in the telling, Callum began to understand the woman he'd married. The merchant's daughter who'd learned to read ledgers before she could read novels. The girl who'd wanted to go to college but couldn't because women weren't admitted. The young woman who'd watched her father's business crumble under debts he'd hidden from her, trying to protect her from worry. He died thinking he'd failed me, she said quietly, left me nothing but debts, and a lesson in how even clever people can be ruined by pride. He didn't fail you, Callum said. Look at what you're doing here. Look at how you're fighting. He taught you that. She smiled, small and sad. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm just stubborn. Nothing wrong with stubborn. As they talked late into the night, Callum realized he was telling her things too, about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to fever when he was 19, about building this place from nothing and watching it slowly slip away despite everything he did, about Catherine and the slow death of their marriage, the way hope could drain out of a relationship like water from a cracked bucket. "Do you still love her?" Alara asked. He considered the question honestly. "No. I did once, desperately, but you can't love someone who sees you as an anchor dragging her down. After a while, you just let go." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Sometimes sad is just realistic." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Callum, thank you for talking to me like a person, like someone whose thoughts matter. Why wouldn't I? You'd be surprised how many people don't. Women are supposed to be decorative and agreeable, not opinionated and strategic. Then they're idiots missing out on the best parts." Her smile this time was genuine, reaching her eyes. "You're a strange man, Callum Hayes." "I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. Something had shifted between them during those evening conversations, a crack in the walls they'd both built, a tentative reaching toward something that might become friendship, or even more. They were still careful with each other, still learning, but the sharp edges of their initial wariness had begun to soften. 6 weeks after Alara's arrival, Barrett Cole rode up to the cabin. Callum saw him coming and felt his jaw tighten, but Alara's hand on his arm stopped him from reaching for the rifle. "Let's hear what he wants," she said quietly. "Information is power." Cole dismounted with the easy confidence of a man who owned most of what he surveyed. He nodded to Callum, then let his gaze slide to Alara with barely concealed contempt. "Hayes. Mrs. Hayes." His tone suggested the title was barely worth speaking. "Wanted to check on how you two were settling in." "We're fine," Callum said shortly. "That's so." Cole's eyes traveled over the property, taking in the half-dug irrigation channel, the mended fences, the tidied cabin yard. "Looks like you've been making improvements." "Just maintaining what's mine." Cole pulled a cigar from his pocket, lit it with deliberate slowness. "Heard you've been asking around town about cattle drives, about buyers in Silver Creek." Callum felt his stomach clench but kept his face neutral. "Heard a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." "See? That's what concerns me." Cole exhaled smoke. "Man in your position, loans coming due, ranch barely scraping by, starts making ambitious plans. Well, sometimes ambition leads to poor decisions. My decisions are my own business. Not when they affect my interests." The pleasant facade dropped, revealing the steel underneath. "You move cattle through my territory to sell at another market. You're undermining the whole system we've got here. Can't have that. Last I checked, you don't own the mountain passes." "No, but I own most of the land you'd need to cross. And I have friends at the bank, friends who might have opinions about extending loans to troublemakers." Alara spoke for the first time, her voice cool and measured. "Mr. Cole, are you threatening us?" Cole's gaze swung to her, and Callum saw the calculation in his eyes, assessing, dismissing, deciding she wasn't worth worrying about. Big mistake, Callum thought. "Just offering friendly advice, Mrs. Hayes. Your husband's got debts he can't pay. Smart move would be to sell while he's still got options, take my generous offer, start fresh somewhere else." "And if we don't consider that smart," Alara asked, "then you'll learn the hard way that pride makes a cold bedfellow come winter." Cole dropped his cigar and ground it under his boot heel. "Offers on the table until the end of the month. After that, I'll just wait for the bank to foreclose and buy at auction for half the price." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a silence heavy with threat. "He knows our plans," Alara said quietly. "Someone in town must have talked. Which means he'll try to stop us, block our route, undermine the sale somehow, maybe even sabotage the drive itself." Callum felt the familiar weight of defeat pressing on his shoulders. "Maybe we should—" "Don't!" Alara turned to him fiercely. "Don't you dare say we should give up. He wants us to be afraid, wants us to fold. That's how men like him win. They make you defeat yourself so they don't have to risk anything." "Alara, he has resources we don't. Power, we can't match. He has power in town where he controls the structures, but we're not playing by town rules anymore. Her eyes blazed with something between fury and exhilaration. We're going around him, outside his sphere of influence, and that terrifies him, or he wouldn't have come here to threaten us. Looking at her, dirt-stained dress, calloused hands, chin lifted in defiance, Callum felt something catch fire in his chest. Hope, dangerous and irresistible. You really believe we can beat him? I believe we can try, and sometimes that's the same thing. He found himself smiling. You know what? You're right. Let him do his worst. We're doing this. We're doing this, she echoed, and sealed it with a firm handshake that had become their way of marking decisions. That night, they revised their plans, anticipating Cole's interference, building in contingencies and alternatives. They worked until the lamp oil ran low and their eyes burned with exhaustion, but when they finally stopped, they had something solid, a plan they both believed in. As Callum banked the fire for the night, Ilara paused at the bedroom door. Callum? Yeah? I'm glad it was you, at the auction. I'm glad it was your $2 and not someone else's. Before he could respond, she closed the door softly, leaving him alone with the warmth spreading through his chest and the absolute certainty that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, this marriage of convenience had become something else entirely, something neither of them had names for yet, but both were beginning to believe in. The first sabotage came 3 nights later. Callum woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress, a sound that pulled him from sleep with his heart already racing. He was on his feet and reaching for his boots before his eyes were fully open, years of ranching instinct overriding conscious thought. What is it? Alar's voice came from the bedroom doorway, alert despite the hour. Cattle. Something's wrong. He grabbed his rifle from above the door. Stay inside. Like hell. She was already pulling on her boots, Catherine's old work coat over her nightgown. If someone's after our herd, I'm not hiding while you face them alone. There wasn't time to argue. Callum lit a lantern and they rushed out into the cold October night, their breath misting in the air. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver and shadow, and what they saw made Callum's blood run cold. The corral gate stood wide open, not broken, not damaged, opened, the latch deliberately lifted, and the cattle were scattering into the darkness, 47 head spreading out across the rangeland where it would take days to round them up again, if they could be rounded up at all. Some were already disappearing into the tree line, and come morning the mountain lions and bears would be waiting. Go left, I'll go right, Callum said, already moving. Just turn them, push them back toward the corral. Don't try to do more than that. They split up, and for the next 2 hours they worked in desperate synchronization, riding through the darkness to head off fleeing cattle, using voice and presence to slowly, painfully herd them back toward home. Alara rode like she'd been born to it, her earlier awkwardness burned away by necessity and adrenaline. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter, just drove the cattle with a fierce determination that matched his own. By the time the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they'd recovered 42 head. 5 were missing, vanished into the wilderness. Callum stood by the corral, now secured with a new rope lashing the gate closed, and felt rage and exhaustion warring in his chest. Alara dismounted beside him, her face pale with fatigue, her hand shaking slightly as she looped the reins over the fence post. Cole, she said flatly. Has to be. Nobody else benefits from us losing cattle. Can we prove it? No, and even if we could, he owns half the law in 3 counties. Callum kicked at the dirt. 5 head, that's nearly $200 lost, and we can't afford to lose a single one. Alara was quiet for a moment, staring at the cattle as they settled nervously in the corral. Then she said, We move up the timeline. What? The cattle drive. We were planning to wait another 3 weeks to let them fatten up more. But if Cole's going to sabotage us, we can't give him time. We drive them to Silver Creek now before he can do more damage. We're not ready. We haven't hired help. We haven't. Then we go alone. Callum stared at her. Alara, a 3-day drive through mountain passes with just the 2 of us? That's insane. We'd lose half the herd, maybe more. And if we wait, Cole picks us apart piece by piece until we've got nothing left to drive anywhere. She turned to face him fully, and he saw the steel in her eyes that he'd first glimpsed on that auction platform. He's trying to break us before we can even fight back. We can't let him. There has to be another way. Show me one, and I'll take it. He couldn't. God help him, he couldn't think of a single alternative that didn't end with them losing everything. Even if we make it to Silver Creek, he said slowly, even if we sell every head at premium prices, we're still short. We lost 5 cattle. That's 5 we can't sell. Then we make it up elsewhere. We sell something else. We borrow. We find a way. Alara's voice was fierce. But we don't quit. We didn't come this far to quit now. Looking at her, exhausted, dirt-streaked, absolutely unbending, Callum felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd cost him $2 had become the strongest ally he'd ever known, and somewhere along the way she'd stopped being just his wife on paper and started being his partner in truth. All right, he said, we drive them ourselves, but we do it smart. We plan every mile, every rest stop, every contingency. No mistakes. No mistakes, she agreed. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Callum checked every piece of equipment twice, repaired tack, shod the horses. Alara packed supplies with ruthless efficiency, calculating exactly what they'd need for 3 days on the trail and not an ounce more. She also spent an hour writing letters, to the bank, to the cattle buyer in Silver Creek, to the land office, explaining their plans and establishing a paper trail. If something happens to us, she explained when Callum questioned it, there's a record of what we were trying to do and who might have wanted to stop us. Cheerful thought, practical thought. Cole's powerful, but he's not immune to scrutiny if there's documentation. That night, as they made final preparations, someone knocked on the cabin door. Callum answered with his hand on his rifle, but it was only old Miguel Santos, who ran a small ranch on the other side of the valley. Don Miguel? Callum said, surprised. What brings you out at this hour? Heard you had trouble last night. Miguel's weathered face was grave. Heard your cattle got scattered. Word travels fast. In a small town, trouble travels faster. Miguel glanced past Callum to where Alara stood by the fire. Came to offer help, if you want it. My nephew Carlos, he's good with cattle. Could ride with you, help manage the herd. Callum exchanged a glance with Alara. They'd given up on finding help, but if it was being offered freely, we can't pay much, he said honestly. We're planning to offer percentage of the sale, but don't want payment. Miguel cut him off. Barrett Cole, he tried to buy my land 2 years ago. When I said no, my well mysteriously got poisoned. Lost half my herd before I could dig a new one. His eyes hardened. Man like that, he needs to learn he can't just take what he wants. You're fighting him. I'll help however I can. Alara stepped forward. We'd be grateful for your nephew's help, Don Miguel. Truly grateful. He'll be here dawn tomorrow. And Senora? Miguel tipped his hat to her. Town's talking about you. About how you work your own land, keep your own books, don't bow to no one. Some folks, they respect that. After he left, Alara turned to Callum with wonder in her eyes. We have help. We have 1 cow hand and a lot of hope. That's not much. It's more than we had this morning. She smiled, and it transformed her face. We're going to do this, Callum. We're actually going to do this. Carlos Santos arrived at dawn as promised, a young man of maybe 20 with his uncle's steady eyes and a natural ease with horses. He listened to their plan without interruption, then nodded once. 3 days to Silver Creek through the northern pass. It's rough country, but doable. We'll need to watch for wolves in the high country, and there's a river crossing on day 2 that can be tricky if the water's up. He looked at Alara with open curiosity. Senora, you've done cattle drives before? No, she said simply, but I learn fast and I don't quit. Good enough, Carlos grinned. My tia is the same way. She runs our ranch better than my uncle ever did, but don't tell him I said that. They moved out within the hour, driving the 42 remaining cattle north toward the mountain pass. Callum took point, Carlos rode swing to keep the herd together, and Alara brought up the rear, watching for stragglers. It was hard, grinding work, keeping the cattle moving at a steady pace while preventing them from scattering or bolting. By midday, Callum's concerns about Alara's inexperience had faded. She'd positioned herself exactly where she was needed, anticipated problems before they developed, and when a young steer tried to break from the herd, she cut him off with a precision that would have impressed a seasoned cowhand. They made good time that first day, covering nearly 15 miles before making camp in a sheltered valley. As Carlos tended the cattle and Callum hobbled the horses, Alara built a fire and started cooking. The smell of coffee and salt pork filled the air, and for the first time in days, Callum felt something like optimism. "We might actually pull this off," he said as they ate. "Might?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "Where's your faith?" "Left it somewhere around the third time I went bankrupt." She laughed, and Carlos joined in, and for a moment they were just three people sharing a meal under the stars, not desperate fighters trying to save a failing ranch. But the peace didn't last. Callum woke in the deep hours of night to the sound of horses neighing in distress. He was up instantly, grabbing his rifle, and saw immediately what was wrong. The cattle were stirring restlessly, spooked by something in the darkness beyond the firelight. "What is it?" Alara was beside him, her own rifle ready. "Don't know. Something's got them nervous." Callum scanned the darkness. "Carlos, check the..." The gunshot cracked through the night like thunder. The bullet struck the ground inches from the nearest cow, and suddenly the herd was moving, panicked and unstoppable, a wave of beef and terror surging into the darkness. More shots followed, deliberately fired to scatter rather than kill, and Callum understood immediately. This wasn't random. This was sabotage. "Stay here," he shouted to Alara, already running for his horse. "No!" She was mounting up even as she spoke. "They'll run straight off a cliff if we don't turn them." There was no time to argue. Callum and Carlos rode into the darkness after the stampeding herd, using voice and presence to try to turn them, to slow them, to prevent total disaster. Behind them, more gunshots rang out, and Callum caught a glimpse of riders silhouetted against the moonlight. 3 of them, maybe 4, deliberately driving the cattle toward rough country. Cole's men. Had to be. The next hour was chaos and terror and desperate action. Somehow, through skill and sheer stubborn will, they managed to turn the herd before they reached the cliff line Carlos had warned about. Slowly, painfully, they gathered the scattered cattle and drove them back toward camp, counting heads in the darkness and praying the count would be close to what they'd started with. By the time the sun rose, they'd recovered 38 head. 4 more were missing, and 1 lay dead with a broken leg from the stampede. 37 cattle left. They'd started with 47 and lost 10 in less than 2 days. Callum stood looking at the dead steer and felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. Even if they sold the remaining cattle at top prices, even if everything went perfectly from here on out, they were now too far short to make the loan payment. "It's over," he said quietly. "We can't make up this kind of loss." "It's not over." Alara's voice was tight with fury, not defeat. "We sell these 37, we make what we can, and then we figure out the rest." "There is no rest, Alara. We needed every head we had, and then some. Now we're short by at least $150 even in the best case. Then we find $150 somewhere else." "Where?" He turned to her, his own anger rising. "Tell me where, because I've looked everywhere and there's nothing left to sell, nothing left to leverage, nothing." "Then we sell the land." The words hung in the air like a curse. "What?" Callum's voice was barely a whisper. "We sell a portion of the land to raise the rest. The southern pasture, maybe, or..." "No." The word came out flat and absolute. "That land is all I have. All I am. I won't sell it. Even if it means losing everything? I sell any of it to Cole. He'll just use it as a wedge to take the rest. You don't understand how men like him work. I understand perfectly well." Alara's voice cracked like a whip. "I watched my father lose everything because he was too proud to compromise, too stubborn to see that holding on to his principles meant losing what he was trying to protect. This isn't the same. It's exactly the same. You're so busy holding on to what you have that you can't see when letting go of a piece might save the whole." They stood facing each other across the dead steer, both breathing hard, both furious and terrified and pushed to their breaking points. Carlos cleared his throat awkwardly. "Señor, Señora, the herd is settled. I can watch them if you two need to talk." "We're done talking," Callum said shortly. He turned and walked away, needing distance, needing space to think without Alara's eyes on him challenging every decision. He'd lost too much already. His parents, his first attempt at ranching, his marriage, nearly all his cattle, his savings, his pride. The land was all he had left that was truly his, the one thing he'd built from nothing that no one had given him or taken away. The thought of selling even an acre felt like cutting off a piece of his soul. But as he stood at the edge of the camp watching the sun paint the mountains gold, he heard Alara's words echoing in his mind, holding on to principles while losing everything worth protecting. Too proud to compromise. His father's voice, too, from years ago. Land is just dirt, son. It's what you do with it that matters. He found Alara sitting on a rock outcropping, staring out at the valley below. Her shoulders were tight with tension, her hands clasped in her lap, and he could see she'd been crying, though she'd wiped the tears away. I'm sorry, he said quietly, settling beside her. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I'm sorry too, I pushed too hard. She didn't look at him. I can't watch you lose this. Not after everything we fought for. You're right, you know. About my father, about holding on too tight. He picked up a pebble and turned it over in his fingers. I've spent 3 years fighting to keep every inch of this land because I thought if I lost any of it, it meant I'd failed. But maybe the real failure is being too stubborn to save what matters most. The land matters to you. It does. But you know what matters more? He finally looked at her and found her watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes. This, us, what we're building together. I can rebuild fences and dig new wells and expand pastures later. But if I lose you because I'm too proud to compromise, that's something I can't get back. She drew in a sharp breath. Callum, we sell the southern pasture if we have to, he continued, but not to Cole. We find someone else, someone who won't use it against us. And we make damn sure we get every penny these cattle are worth first. Alara's hand found his, and their fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. We will. We'll make it work. Presuming we survive the next 2 days and Cole doesn't send more hired guns after us. He won't. You sound sure. I am. He'll assume the stampede did his work for him. Why risk his men on additional attacks when we're probably already broken? Her eyes glinted. He doesn't know us very well if he thinks one stampede is enough to stop us. Despite everything, Callum smiled. You're a fierce woman, Alara Hayes. I learned from watching someone else refuse to quit, even when they should have. She squeezed his hand. We're both too stubborn to know when we're beaten. That's either going to save us or destroy us. Let's aim for saving. They sat together watching the sunrise, hands linked, two people who'd found each other at the worst possible moment and somehow made it work. When they finally stood and walked back to camp, something had shifted between them. Not just partnership anymore, but something deeper, something neither was quite ready to name, but both felt thrumming beneath every word and gesture. The second day of the drive proved harder than the first. The cattle were nervous from the stampede, prone to spooking at shadows. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the mountain pass, narrow trails with sheer drops on one side. Every mile was hard won, every hour a battle against nature and exhausted animals. They reached the river crossing by late afternoon. The water was higher than Carlos had hoped, swollen from early mountain snow, running fast and deep enough to be dangerous. We should wait for morning, Carlos suggested. Let the water drop overnight. Can't afford to lose the time, Callum said. Cole might have more surprises waiting, and every hour we delay gives him chances. Then we cross now, but carefully. I'll take point, test the bottom. Senor, you bring up the rear and push them forward. Senora, I'll ride middle and keep them from bunching, Alara finished. I understand. Carlos nodded approvingly and urged his horse into the water. The current caught at the animal's legs immediately, strong and cold, but the cowhand kept the horse moving steadily forward, feeling for solid footing. Halfway across, he turned and signaled. It's passable, send them. Callum started pushing the herd forward. The cattle balked at the water's edge, lowing their distress, but with Alara pressing from the side and Callum from behind, they finally began to move. One by one, they entered the river, struggling against the current. Everything was going well until a young steer lost its footing in the middle of the crossing. It went down hard, thrashing in the water, and immediately the cattle around it panicked. The herd bunched up, blocking the crossing, cattle stumbling over each other in their fear. Keep them moving, Carlos shouted over the roar of the water. Don't let them stop. But it was too late. The The herd was jamming up, cattle slipping, water getting deeper around them. Callum saw immediately that if they didn't break the jam, they'd lose more animals to drowning. He didn't think, just acted, riding directly into the mass of cattle and using his horse to physically push them apart, to create channels for the water to flow through, to force them to keep moving forward. It was dangerous. One wrong step and his horse could go down, and a man in that current with panicked cattle all around would be crushed in seconds. But then Alara was beside him, her horse shouldering into the jam from the other side, and together they broke the blockage. The cattle began moving again, slowly at first, and then with more confidence, until finally the last steer climbed out on the far bank. Callum counted heads. 37. They hadn't lost a single one. On the far bank, soaked to the skin and shaking with adrenaline and cold, Alara started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, but the genuine sound of someone who'd just survived something impossible and couldn't quite believe it. "We did it," she said, water streaming from her hair. "We actually did it." "You're crazy," Callum told her, but he was smiling. "Riding into that jam like that, you could have been killed." "So could you, but we weren't." She looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something more than just triumph. "We're going to make it, Callum. All the way to Silver Creek, all the way to saving the ranch. We're going to make it." And looking at her, soaked, exhausted, absolutely radiant with determination, Callum felt something in his chest crack open, something he'd kept locked away since Catherine left. Hope, yes, but more than that. Trust. Belief. Maybe even the beginning of something that felt dangerously like love. They made camp that night in a sheltered glen, building a large fire to dry their clothes and warm their bones. The cattle settled easily, exhausted from the crossing, and Carlos took first watch while Callum and Alara sat close to the flames. "Tell me something," Alara said quietly. "When you bid those $2, what did you think would happen?" "Honestly, I thought I'd bring you home, you'd realize what a mess you'd gotten into, and you'd leave at the first opportunity. And now? Now I think I got the best bargain of my life," he said simply. $2 for a partner who's braver and stronger than anyone I've ever known. She turned to look at him, and firelight danced in her eyes. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." He paused. "Like riding into that river jam today." "Like spending your last money on a stranger," she countered. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "Callum?" Alara's voice was soft. "What happens when we get back? After we sell the cattle? After we save the ranch?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are we? Really? We married out of desperation, but somewhere along the way it became something else, or am I imagining that?" He turned to face her fully. "You're not imagining it. Then what is it?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out. If you're willing." For answer, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't like kisses in dime novels, passionate and desperate. It was careful and questioning, an exploration rather than a declaration. Her lips were soft against his, tasting of coffee and smoke, and when she pulled back, her eyes held both wonder and fear. "I'm willing," she whispered. Callum cupped her face in his hands, feeling the delicate bones beneath calloused skin. "I never thanked you properly. For believing in the ranch when I'd stopped believing. For fighting beside me. For being exactly what I needed when I didn't know what I needed. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You treated me like a person, not property. You let me be strong when the world kept telling me to be small." She covered his hands with hers. "I think we saved each other." "Yeah," he agreed. "I think maybe we did." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally pulled apart, the fear in Alara's eyes had been replaced by something warmer, something that looked like home. The third day dawned clear and cold, frost covering the ground in white crystal. They broke camp early and pushed the herd hard, knowing Silver Creek was only hours away. The cattle sensed the end of the journey and moved with less resistance, and by early afternoon they could see the town in the distance, its buildings clustered around the railroad depot. "Almost there," Carlos said, grinning. "And we didn't lose a single head today. That's good luck." "Don't jinx it," Alara warned, but she was smiling too. They drove the cattle into the stockyard on the outskirts of town, where a man in a suit was already waiting, William Ashford, the buyer Alara had corresponded with. He walked through the herd with a practiced eye, examining teeth, checking hooves, running his hands over flanks. "Good stock," he said finally. "Healthy, well-maintained despite obvious hardship. You've taken good care of these animals." "We did our best," Callum said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Ashford pulled out a notebook and did some calculations. "I can offer you $22 a head for the lot. That's $814 total." Callum's heart sank. It was a fair price, even a good price, but it still left them short of what they needed. But Alara stepped forward. "Mr. Ashford, these cattle were driven through a stampede in a mountain pass, across a swollen river, and they arrived in better condition than most herds that travel half the distance. That speaks to their quality and hardiness. They're worth more than $22, and we both know it." Ashford studied her with new respect. "What did you have in mind, Mrs. Hayes?" $25 a head. That's $925 total, which is still a bargain for stock this good that will ship to Chicago without losses. 23, Ashford countered. 24, and we throw in advice on the best route to get them to the railhead without stress. Ashford laughed. "You drive a hard bargain, ma'am." He extended his hand. 24 it is. $888. Alara shook his hand firmly. "Pleasure doing business with you." As Ashford went to prepare the bank draft, Callum turned to Alara in amazement. "How did you do that?" "I learned from the best negotiator in Boston," she said simply. "My father always said the first price is never the real price." $888. Combined with the money they'd saved and the equipment they could sell, they might, just might, have enough to make the loan payment and still have something left to rebuild with. They spent that night in Silver Creek's only boarding house, Carlos in one room and Callum and Alara sharing another for the first time. There were 2 beds in the room, but by unspoken agreement they chose only one, lying together in the darkness, Alara's head on Callum's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it. We're not safe yet. We still have to get the money to the bank, still have to convince them to extend the loan for the rest. We will. But for tonight, can we just be proud of what we accomplished?" Callum pressed a kiss to her hair. "Yeah, for tonight, we can do that." Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of winter, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. But inside, wrapped in each other's warmth, 2 people who'd started as strangers held each other close and dreamed of the future they were building together, one hard-fought dollar at a time. The journey back to the ranch took 2 days instead of 3, and every mile felt different now, lighter somehow despite the autumn cold settling deeper into the mountains and the ever-present awareness that their fight wasn't over yet. Callum rode beside Alara, their horses walking in easy companionship, and found himself stealing glances at her profile. The determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, always thinking, always planning. "You're staring," she said without looking at him, "just appreciating what $2 can buy." She did turn then, one eyebrow raised. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never. It's the best investment I ever made." He paused. "Though I'm thinking of renegotiating the terms." "Oh, and what terms would those be?" "Well, the original contract was for a wife in name only, but somewhere between the irrigation ditch and that river crossing, I started thinking maybe we could make this real." Alara's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze steadily. "Callum Hayes, are you proposing to me? Again?" "I'm saying that the first time we married out of necessity. This time I'd like to marry because we want to, because what we've built together is worth keeping." He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "I love you, Alara. Don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between your sharp tongue and your stubborn refusal to quit, you became everything to me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you spent your last money on a stranger and called it hope." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, to all of it. To making this real, to choosing each other freely this time." Carlos, riding ahead, turned in his saddle and grinned. "About time you 2 figured that out. My tío said you were in love the day we started the drive, but I told him you were both too stubborn to admit it yet." "Your tío is a wise man," Callum said, not taking his eyes off Alara. He is. He also said to tell you that when you're ready, half the valley will come to help with whatever you need. Barrett Cole? He's made a lot of enemies. People are just waiting for someone to stand up to him successfully. Carlos's expression turned serious. You did that. You went around him, proved he doesn't control everything. That means something. They reached the ranch at dusk the second day, and Callum felt his chest tighten as the familiar shape of the cabin came into view. Home. It had been just a building when he'd brought Alara here, a shelter and nothing more. But now, with smoke curling from the chimney that she'd insisted on cleaning properly, with the garden plot she'd started even though it was too late in the season, with her presence woven into every corner, now it was truly home. Tomorrow we go to the bank, Alara said as they dismounted. We present the money, we show them the improvements we've made, and we negotiate an extension on the rest. And if they won't extend? Then we sell the southern pasture to Miguel Santos. He offered, remember? Said he'd pay fair price and we could buy it back when we're solvent. She touched his face gently. Whatever happens, we face it together. That night, after Carlos had ridden home with their thanks and a generous portion of the cattle sale money as payment, Callum and Alara sat before the fire and made lists. Lists of debts, of assets, of improvements still needed, of plans for spring. But they also talked about other things, about where they'd hang curtains Alara wanted to sew, about the bookshelf Callum would build for the volumes she'd carefully preserved from her father's shop, about children they might have and what they'd teach them about perseverance and hope. I want them to know your story, Alara said softly, how their father spent his last $2 on a leap of faith. Our story, Callum corrected, how their mother turned a failing ranch around with nothing but ledgers and determination, how their parents refused to quit even when everyone said they should. That's a good story to grow up with. They made love that night for the first time as a couple who'd chosen each other freely, and it was tender and hesitant and perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Alara's head on his chest and her hand over his heart, Callum felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having won, because the fight was far from over, but the peace of knowing that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. Morning came too soon, gray and cold with the promise of snow. They dressed in their best clothes, Callum's one good suit that had seen better days, Alara in a dress she'd carefully mended and pressed. She'd pinned her hair up in a way that made her look older, more severe, and when she tucked the bank draft into her reticule along with the carefully prepared documentation of their ranch improvements, she looked every inch the Boston merchant's daughter she'd once been. Ready? Callum asked. Ready. The ride to town felt longer than usual, each mile weighted with significance. They'd gambled everything on this moment, and if the bank refused to work with them, they'd lose it all anyway, despite their success in Silver Creek. Barrett Cole's influence ran deep, and the bank manager, Henry Worthington, was known to be in Cole's pocket. The bank was an imposing brick building in the center of town, its presence designed to intimidate. Callum had always felt small walking through those doors, diminished by the marble floors and the tellers who looked through him rather than at him. But today, with Alara's hand in his and the weight of their hard-won money in his pocket, he walked in with his head high. Worthington's office was all dark wood and leather, designed to make supplicants feel their inferior position. The bank manager himself was a portly man with calculating eyes and the smooth manner of someone practiced in delivering bad news with a smile. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, he said, gesturing to chairs, I must say, I'm surprised to see you here. I'd heard your cattle drive ended in disaster. You heard wrong, Alara said crisply. We delivered 37 head to Silver Creek and sold them at premium prices. We're here to make a payment on our loan. She placed the bank draft on the desk. $800 of the $888 they'd made, keeping the rest for immediate expenses and emergency reserves. Worthington picked it up and examined it as if looking for fraud. This is unexpected, he admitted. However, it doesn't cover the full amount due. You still owe $670 including interest and fees. We're aware, Alara said, which is why we're here to negotiate an extension. We've made substantial improvements to the property, including an irrigation channel that will allow us to bring the southern pasture into production. We have documentation here showing increased property value and projected income for next year. She spread her carefully prepared papers across Worthington's desk. Maps, calculations, letters from Miguel Santos, and 3 other ranchers attesting to the viability of their plans. Callum watched her work and felt a surge of pride. This was her battlefield, and she fought with the precision of a general. Worthington examined the documents with increasing discomfort. This is all very impressive, Mrs. Hayes, but bank policy is quite clear. Partial payments don't stop foreclosure proceedings unless approved by the board, and I'm afraid the board meets in 3 days, Alara interrupted. We'd like to present our case directly to them. That's highly irregular. So is sabotaging a cattle drive to force a foreclosure that benefits a major stakeholder in this bank. Alara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I'm sure the board would be very interested to hear about the mysterious riders who stampeded our herd, especially since we have witness testimony placing Barrett Cole's men in the area at the time. Worthington's face went pale, then red. Are you threatening this institution, Mrs. Hayes? I'm stating facts, Mr. Worthington. Whether those facts constitute a threat depends entirely on whether this institution has been acting in good faith. She leaned forward slightly. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for a fair evaluation of our situation by the people who actually make decisions, not by intermediaries who might have conflicts of interest. The 2 locked eyes across the desk, and Callum saw the moment Worthington realized he'd underestimated the woman in front of him. I'll arrange a meeting with the board, Worthington said stiffly. Friday morning, 9 o'clock, but I can't promise they'll agree to an extension. We don't expect promises, just a fair hearing. Alara stood, and Callum followed her lead. We'll see you Friday, Mr. Worthington. They walked out of the bank into the cold afternoon, and Callum waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. You were magnificent in there. I was terrified. Alara's hands were shaking as she pulled on her gloves. Did you see how angry he got? If the board rules against us, they won't. Not after seeing what you prepared. He helped her onto her horse. Besides, you were right about the sabotage. That's leverage, and Worthington knows it. Only if we're willing to use it. If we actually accuse Cole publicly and can't prove it, he'll destroy us and anyone who supports us. Then we make sure we can prove it. Over the next 3 days, they worked harder than ever. Callum rode out to every small rancher in the valley, gathering statements about Cole's tactics, his buyout attempts, the strange misfortunes that befell anyone who refused him. Alara, meanwhile, compiled everything into a dossier that was part legal brief, part accounting ledger, part indictment. Miguel Santos proved invaluable, introducing them to other ranchers who'd suffered under Cole's machinations. There was Thomas Gray, who'd lost his best breeding stock to a mysterious illness right after refusing to sell his water rights. Martha Chen, whose barn had burned down the week after she'd outbid Cole for property at auction. Jacob Thornton, who'd been driven out of business by suddenly inflated supply costs at the only general store, owned, of course, by one of Cole's associates. We never talked about it, Miguel explained as they sat in his modest home reviewing documents. Each of us thought we were alone, that we'd just had bad luck. But when you connect the pattern, he shook his head. Cole's been running this valley like his personal kingdom, and we all just accepted it because fighting seemed impossible. It's not impossible, Alara said quietly. It's just hard. But hard isn't the same as impossible. By Friday morning, they had a case that was damning in its thoroughness. Callum wore his best suit again, and Alara wore the same mended dress, but this time she carried a leather portfolio that Miguel had given her, filled with evidence and testimony and hope. The bank's boardroom was even more intimidating than Worthington's office. All heavy oak and portraits of stern-faced founders. 5 men sat around a massive table. The board members, ranging in age from 40 to 70, all wearing identical expressions of skepticism. And at the far end of the table, uninvited but present nonetheless, sat Barrett Cole. Callum felt his jaw tighten, but Alara's hand on his arm steadied him. They'd expected this. Cole would want to be here for the kill. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, said the chairman, a white-haired man named Douglas Fletcher, you've requested this hearing to appeal your loan foreclosure, The board has agreed to listen, but I'll remind you that our time is valuable. Be concise. Alara stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and confident. Gentlemen, 3 months ago my husband's ranch was failing. He had 47 cattle, mounting debts, and no clear path forward. Today, we've made a substantial payment on our loan, improved our property's value by at least 20%, and established profitable relationships with buyers outside Mr. Cole's controlled market. She opened her portfolio and began distributing copies of their documentation to each board member. You'll find here a complete accounting of our assets, our debts, our improvements, and our projected income for the coming year. We're not asking you to forgive our debt. We're asking for a 12-month extension to prove that our ranch is viable and profitable. Mrs. Hayes, Cole interrupted smoothly, this is all very impressive paperwork, but it doesn't change the fact that your husband has failed to meet his contractual obligations. Sentiment doesn't pay debts. You're absolutely right, Mr. Cole, Alara agreed, which is why we've brought $800 in payment today with a clear plan for paying the remainder. She turned to the board. However, since Mr. Cole has chosen to involve himself in these proceedings, perhaps the board would also be interested in reviewing this additional documentation. She pulled out a second folder, this one containing the statements from the Valley Ranchers, the timeline of mysterious misfortunes, the pattern of coercion and manipulation that pointed directly to Cole's involvement in sabotaging anyone who opposed him. What is this? Fletcher demanded, taking the folder. Evidence of systematic interference in free commerce in this valley, including the sabotage of our cattle drive and numerous other incidents affecting local ranchers. Alara's voice never wavered. We're prepared to take this evidence to the territorial governor if necessary, but we thought the board should be aware that extending our loan isn't just good business. It's also the right thing to do when outside forces have been actively working to ensure our failure. Cole's face darkened dangerously. This is outrageous. These are baseless accusations from disgruntled— We have testimony from 7 ranchers, Callum interrupted, speaking for the first time. We have dates, times, and patterns that are pretty damn hard to explain as coincidence. And we have witnesses who saw your men driving our cattle toward a cliff during our drive to Silver Creek. Witnesses you've clearly paid to lie. Carlos Santos doesn't lie. Miguel's voice rang out from the doorway. The old rancher stepped into the room, followed by Thomas Gray, Martha Chen, and 4 other Valley ranchers. And neither do the rest of us. We're here to testify that everything in those documents is true. Fletcher looked at the assembled ranchers, then at Cole, then at the documents in front of him. The other board members were reading rapidly, their expressions growing more troubled by the moment. This is highly irregular, Fletcher said slowly. Mr. Cole, do you have a response to these allegations? Cole's smooth mask had cracked, revealing the rage beneath. These people are conspiracy theorists grasping at straws. I'm a businessman, not a criminal. If they've had difficulties, that's the nature of ranching in hard country. Then you won't mind if we investigate these claims thoroughly, Fletcher said. In the meantime, I believe the board needs to discuss the Hayes loan application in private. He looked at Alara and Callum. If you'll wait outside, please. The next 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Callum paced the hallway while Alara sat with rigid composure, only the white of her knuckles betraying her tension. The other ranchers waited with them, a show of solidarity that meant more than Callum could express. Finally, the door opened. Fletcher emerged, his expression unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, the board has reached a decision. We're granting a 12-month extension on your loan with modified terms. You'll make quarterly payments based on the schedule Mrs. Hayes proposed, with the full balance due in 1 year. Additionally, we'll be conducting a formal investigation into Mr. Cole's business practices in this valley. Callum felt his knees go weak with relief. Alara stood, somehow maintaining her composure, and extended her hand to Fletcher. Thank you, sir. We won't let you down. See that you don't. This bank supports its community members, Mrs. Hayes, but we also expect results. Fletcher glanced back toward the boardroom where Cole was visible through the doorway, his face a mask of fury. And perhaps it's time we remembered that community is more than just the wealthiest voice in the room. They walked out of the bank into winter sunshine, and the moment they were outside, the gathered ranchers broke into cheers. Miguel clapped Callum on the back, while Martha Chen hugged Alara with surprising strength for such a small woman. "You did it," Miguel said. "You stood up to Cole and won." "We all did it," Alara corrected. "None of this would have worked without all of you standing together." "No, Senora," Miguel said seriously. "We've been here for years and done nothing. You've been here 3 months and changed everything. You showed us it was possible to fight back." As they rode home that afternoon, the weight of what they'd accomplished settled over them. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but they'd won a chance to build something lasting. The ranch was theirs for another year, and this time they had a real plan, real support, and each other. "I can't believe it worked," Callum said as the cabin came into view. "I can," Alara replied. "We had the truth on our side and we had each other. That's a powerful combination." That night, as snow began to fall in earnest outside, they sat before the fire and made new plans. Not desperate plans this time, but hopeful ones. They'd buy more cattle in the spring, young stock they could raise and breed. They'd finish the irrigation channel and plant the southern pasture with hay. They'd build relationships with buyers in Silver Creek, and maybe even beyond, creating options that didn't depend on Cole's goodwill. "We need to make this marriage real," Callum said suddenly. "I mean, legally real, not just in our hearts." "We are legally married," Alara pointed out. "We are, but it was done under duress for survival. I want to marry you again, properly, in front of the whole town. I want everyone to know that I didn't buy a wife for $2. I found a partner worth everything I have." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "You want a wedding?" "I want to stand up in front of God and everyone and choose you freely, the way I should have been able to from the start. Will you marry me, Alara? Again? For real this time?" "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." They set the date for the first Sunday in December, giving them 3 weeks to prepare. Word spread through the valley quickly, and to their surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Miguel's wife Rosa immediately took charge of organizing a celebration, insisting that the whole community would contribute food and music. Martha Chen offered to make Alara a proper wedding dress from fabric she'd been saving for something special. Even the pastor, Father McKenna, seemed pleased to officiate a ceremony that was about love rather than desperation. "People are proud of you," Rosa explained to Alara as they worked together on the dress. "You stood up to Cole, you fought for your land, and you did it with grace and intelligence. The women especially, we see what you've done, how you've made yourself a true partner instead of just a helpmate. It matters." The only shadow over their preparations came from Barrett Cole himself. He'd been conspicuously absent from town since the bank board meeting, but his influence still lingered. The general store owner, loyal to Cole, refused to sell them supplies at any price. The blacksmith, who owed Cole money, turned them away. Small acts of petty revenge that stung but didn't stop them. "Let him be angry," Callum said when Alara worried about retaliation. "We beat him fair and square. If he comes after us again, we'll beat him again. And if he doesn't fight fair, then neither will we." The week before the wedding, Callum rode out to check the winter pasture and found something that made his blood run cold. The irrigation channel they'd worked so hard to dig had been deliberately destroyed, filled in with rocks and debris. It would take weeks to clear and repair, time they couldn't spare before the ground froze completely. He returned home to find Alara in the cabin, going over spring planting schedules. One look at his face and she set down her pen. "What happened?" He told her. She listened in silence, her expression growing harder with each word. "Cole," she said flatly when he finished. "Probably, though we can't prove it." "Then we don't repair it." Callum blinked. "What?" "We don't repair it before winter. We document the damage, we gather evidence, we add it to our case against him, and in spring we rebuild it better than before, with the whole valley helping us." Alara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered land. "He wants us to waste our time and energy reacting to his sabotage. Instead, we focus on what matters: the wedding, the winter preparations, building our alliances. The irrigation channel can wait." "That's 3 months of work he destroyed." "No, that's 3 months of work he delayed. There's a difference." She turned back to him. "We're playing a long game now, Callum. We don't have to win every battle, just the war." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, marveling at her strength, her strategic mind, her refusal to be rattled by setbacks. When did you get so wise? I learned from watching someone refuse to give up on a failing ranch and a $2 bride. The Sunday of their wedding dawned cold and crystalline, the world covered in fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Alara dressed in the cabin while Callum waited outside with Miguel and Carlos, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie for the third time. Nervous? Miguel asked, amused. Terrified. What if she changes her mind? After everything you two have been through? Carlos laughed. Senor, that woman would walk through fire for you. I don't think a wedding is going to scare her off. The small church was packed with people from all over the valley, far more than Callum had expected. Ranchers and their families, townspeople who'd quietly supported them, even a few of Cole's former employees who'd grown tired of working for a tyrant. Someone had decorated the simple space with evergreen boughs and candles, transforming it into something magical. And then Alara appeared at the back of the church, and Callum forgot how to breathe. The dress Martha had made was simple but beautiful, cream-colored wool that fit Alara perfectly, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She'd left her hair down for once, dark waves falling past her shoulders, and she wore a circlet of winter berries that Rosa had woven that morning. But what made her truly beautiful was the joy on her face, the absolute certainty in her eyes as she walked toward him. No one gave her away. She came of her own free will, choosing him as surely as he was choosing her. Father McKenna smiled at them both as they took their places before the altar. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to witness something rare and precious, two people choosing each other not once, but twice. First out of necessity, and now out of love. The ceremony was short but meaningful. When it came time for vows, Callum spoke from the heart. Alara, when I first saw you on that auction block, I saw someone who refused to break. I didn't know then that you'd save my life in a dozen different ways, that you'd teach me what true partnership means, that you'd show me how to hope again. I promise to stand beside you in every fight, to value your mind as much as your heart, and to never, ever take for granted the gift of your trust. I love you, and I choose you, today and every day forward. Alara's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Callum, you spent your last $2 on a stranger because you believed in the possibility of hope. You gave me dignity when I had nothing, treated me as an equal when the world said I was worth less. You've shown me that home isn't a place but a person, and that person is you. I promise to fight beside you, to build with you, to love you with everything I am. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for the best $2 ever spent. The congregation laughed through their own tears at that, and when Father McKenna pronounced them husband and wife, truly, this time, the cheers shook the rafters. Callum kissed his bride there in the little church, surrounded by friends they hadn't known they had, and felt the last piece of his broken heart slot into place. This was what winning looked like. Not wealth or power or even security, but this, a community that supported them, a love that had been earned through trial and hardship, a future they'd fight for together. The celebration afterward was everything Callum hadn't known he needed. Tables groaning with food that everyone had contributed, music from a fiddle player who'd driven 2 days to be there, dancing and laughter that went on until the stars came out. He danced with Alara first, then with Rosa and Martha and every other woman who'd supported them, while Alara charmed the Valley ranchers and accepted their congratulations with grace. As the party wound down and people began to drift home, Miguel pulled Callum aside. I have a wedding gift for you, he said, handing over an envelope. Papers for the southern pasture. Callum opened it, confused. I don't understand. 20 acres of my land that borders yours on the south. It has good water access from my creek, and it connects to your irrigation channel route. I'm deeding it to you and Alara. Miguel held up a hand when Callum tried to protest. You showed us how to fight back. You united this valley against a common enemy. That's worth more than land. Besides, he grinned, now you won't have to sell your own southern pasture if money gets tight. You'll have this as a buffer. Miguel, I can't accept. You can and you will. It's done, signed and registered with the territorial office. Cole can't touch it. Miguel gripped Callum's shoulder. Build something good here, amigo. Build something that lasts. Show the rest of us it's possible. Later, as Callum and Alara rode home through the snow-quiet night, he told her about Miguel's gift. She was silent for a long moment, and when he looked over, he saw tears freezing on her cheeks. "People are good," she said wonderfully. "Even when the world is hard, people are good." "Some people," Callum corrected. "The ones worth knowing." At the cabin, Callum lifted Alara down from her horse and carried her over the threshold, properly this time. Not like that first awkward day when they'd both been strangers. Inside, he'd lit the fire earlier and the cabin glowed with warmth and welcome. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, setting her down gently, "how does it feel to be properly married?" "Like coming home," she answered. "Like everything that came before was just practice for this moment." They made love that night slowly, reverently, two people who knew exactly what they had and what it was worth. Afterward, wrapped in quilts and each other, they talked about the future until they fell asleep mid-sentence, content and complete. Winter settled over the valley in earnest after that, snow piling high and temperatures dropping to brutal lows. But inside the cabin, Callum and Alara were warm. They spent long evenings planning for spring, reading to each other from Alara's precious books, teaching each other things they'd never thought to share before. Callum showed her how to identify different bird calls, how to predict weather from cloud formations, how to read the land. Alara taught him about bookkeeping systems more sophisticated than his simple ledger, about negotiation tactics, about the political currents in the East that might affect cattle prices. They also talked about their past more honestly than before. Alara told him about her mother's death when she was young, about growing up trying to fill that void by being useful, being smart, being indispensable to her father's business, about the shame she'd felt when everything collapsed, as if her worth was measured only in success. "You know that's not true," Callum said. "Your worth has nothing to do with your father's debts or your circumstances." "I know that now. You taught me that." She traced patterns on his chest idly. "You looked at me when I had nothing and saw someone worth fighting for. That changed everything." He told her about Catherine, more fully this time, about how young they'd both been, how marriage had seemed like the next logical step without either of them really understanding what they were promising, about the slow erosion of affection under the weight of hardship, the way resentment could poison even genuine feeling. "I don't blame her anymore," he said. "She wanted a different life, and she found someone who could give it to her. I just wish I'd been honest with myself sooner about what I really needed." Which was? Someone who saw the land the way I do. Not as something to escape from, but as something to build on. Someone who wanted to create rather than consume. He kissed her forehead. "Someone like you." "I never knew I wanted this," Alara admitted. "Growing up in Boston, I thought happiness meant civilization, culture, society. But those things are just trappings. Real happiness is this: working beside someone you trust, building something that matters, knowing that whatever comes, you won't face it alone." The winter passed in a rhythm of small joys and daily work. Callum maintained the ranch, kept the cattle fed, repaired equipment in the barn while Alara managed their accounts, corresponded with potential buyers, and planned their spring expansion. They celebrated their first Christmas together simply, with a small evergreen tree that Callum cut from their own land and decorations Alara fashioned from scraps and imagination. On Christmas morning, Callum gave her a wooden box he'd spent weeks carving, inlaid with a pattern of stars. Inside was a new ledger, leather-bound and expensive, the kind a Boston merchant would have used. "For your records," he said. "Proper tools for proper work." She gave him a shirt she'd sewn from fabric she'd bought secretly during one of their trips to town. The stitching so fine and even it looked almost machine-made. And wrapped in the shirt was something else, a small painted portrait of the two of them, done from memory by Martha Chen's artistic daughter. "So you always remember," Alara said softly. "Remember this moment, when we chose each other freely." They held each other close by the fire, watching snow fall past the window, and marveled at how far they'd come from that dusty auction block where everything had started. But even in the midst of winter peace, they knew Cole hadn't forgotten them. Word filtered through the valley of his movements, buying up smaller ranches at cut-rate prices, consolidating power, preparing for spring. He'd been quiet since the bank board meeting, but they both knew it was the quiet of something dangerous biding its time. "He'll come at us again," Alara said one evening as they reviewed their finances. "Probably in spring when we're most vulnerable, trying to buy new stock and expand operations." "Let him come. We beat him once, we'll beat him again." "Callum, he has resources we can't match. Money, influence, men willing to do his dirty work. And we have something he'll never have, people who actually want to help us. This whole valley is on our side now." He pulled her close. "Besides, we're not the same people he first tried to break. We're stronger now. Together." "Together," she echoed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like hope and determination and the promise of spring. As winter slowly released its grip on the land and the first hints of thaw appeared, Callum and Alara stood together on their porch watching the sun rise over mountains still capped with snow. In a few weeks, they'd start the irrigation channel repairs with help from Miguel and the other valley ranchers. They'd buy new breeding stock, plant their expanded pastures, build the future they'd been planning all winter. "Ready?" Callum asked, squeezing her hand. "Ready," Alara confirmed. "Whatever comes, we face it together." And standing there in the dawn light, two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation had become partners bound by love, ready to fight for the life they'd built together, one hard-won day at a time. Spring came to Montana like a promise kept. Snow melting into streams that fed the greening valley, wildflowers painting the hillsides in colors so vivid they seemed unreal. Callum stood in the southern pasture watching Miguel, Carlos, and a dozen other valley ranchers work on clearing the sabotaged irrigation channel, their voices carrying across the morning air in a mixture of Spanish and English, laughter punctuating the rhythm of their labor. "We'll have it cleared by week's end," Miguel called out. "Then we dig the extension to connect with my creek. By summer, you'll have the best watered pasture in the valley." Callum shook his head in wonder. 6 months ago, he'd been alone and failing. Now he had help he hadn't asked for, friendship he hadn't expected, and a future that seemed almost possible. Alara emerged from the cabin carrying a basket of food and a jug of water for the workers. She'd changed since that first day. Not just physically, though the hollow places in her cheeks had filled out, and her hands were strong and capable now, but in the way she moved through the world. There was confidence in her stride, certainty in her smile. She belonged here in a way she'd never belonged anywhere else. "The cattle buyer from Silver Creek wrote back," she said, handing Callum the letter. "He wants first option on our fall stock, and he's willing to pay 25% above market rate for exclusive rights." 25%? Callum scanned the letter. "That's incredible." "It's smart business. He knows our stock is quality, and he knows we'll deliver on time despite obstacles. Reliability is worth paying for." She watched the men working. "We'll make our next loan payment early at this rate, maybe even start saving for expansion. You're a miracle worker." "I'm a bookkeeper who married a stubborn rancher. Together we're moderately competent." But she was smiling as she said it, and when she looked at him, her eyes held all the warmth of the spring sun. The weeks that followed were a blur of hard work and steady progress. They bought 15 head of quality breeding stock, young cows and a prime bull that would form the foundation of their expanding herd. The irrigation channel was completed and extended, bringing water to acres that had been useless for years. Seeds went into the ground, hay and alfalfa that would provide winter feed and extra income from selling surplus to neighboring ranches. Every evening, Alara would update the ledgers while Callum cooked dinner, a reversal of their early roles that neither questioned anymore. They'd learned to share the work according to strength and interest rather than tradition, and the partnership made them both more effective. "We're going to make it," Alara said one night, her pen poised over a column of numbers. "Not just survive, actually prosper. Look at these projections. If everything goes according to plan, we'll be completely debt-free within 3 years. And if it doesn't go according to plan, then we adapt and figure it out, like we always do." She closed the ledger and came to sit beside him. "Callum, do you ever think about that day at the auction, about how different things could have been? Every day. If I'd walked away, if someone else had bid, no one else would have. You were the only person in that room who saw me as human instead of merchandise. She took his hand. You gave me back my dignity before you gave me anything else. That's what saved me, not the $2. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and sunshine and something uniquely her. You saved me just as much. Gave me a reason to fight when I'd forgotten why I was fighting. We saved each other then. And we keep saving each other every day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching firelight dance across the cabin walls, until Alara spoke again, her voice tentative in a way that was unusual for her. I've been thinking about something, about the future beyond just the ranch. What about it? About children, about family. She looked up at him. I know we haven't talked about it seriously, but I want that with you. I want to fill this cabin with life and noise and all the chaos that comes with it. Callum felt his throat tighten with emotion. I want that too. God, I want that. I just didn't know if you, after everything you've been through, I didn't want to assume. I want it all, she said firmly. The ranch, the family, the life we're building. I want to grow old here with you, watching our children work this land and teach their children about the day their grandfather spent his last $2 on hope. Best investment I ever made, he murmured, kissing her deeply. But even in the midst of their happiness, the shadow of Barrett Cole loomed. He'd been quiet all winter and into spring, which made both of them nervous. Cole wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and the longer he stayed silent, the more dangerous his eventual move would be. The blow came in early May, just as the first hay crop was starting to come in. Callum rode into town for supplies and found the general store locked up tight in the middle of the day. Strange. He tried the blacksmith next, also closed. The feed store, the hardware shop, even the saloon. All closed, all bearing the same hand-lettered sign, closed for inventory. At the bank, he found Worthington's replacement. The manager had mysteriously resigned the week before. A thin man named Sykes, with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached his face. Mr. Hayes, what a pleasant surprise. I was just about to send someone out to your ranch. What's going on? Why are all the shops closed? Inventory day. Mr. Cole has bought controlling interest in most of the businesses in town. He's reorganizing. Sykes shuffled papers on his desk. Which brings me to why I needed to see you. There's been an accounting error regarding your loan. Callum felt his stomach drop. What kind of error? It seems the previous manager miscalculated the interest rates and payment schedule. The actual amount due is significantly higher than what you were quoted. Sykes pushed a paper across the desk. You owe an additional $800, due in 30 days. That's impossible. My wife went through every line of that contract. Nevertheless, these are the correct figures. I have the original loan documents here if you'd like to review them. Callum took the documents with shaking hands. They looked official, complete with stamps and signatures, but the numbers were different from what he and Alara had based all their planning on. If these were real, they were ruined. They couldn't possibly raise $800 in 30 days, not with all their capital tied up in new stock and spring planting. There has to be some mistake, he said desperately. I assure you there's no mistake. However, Sykes leaned back in his chair. Mr. Cole has authorized me to make you an offer. He's willing to purchase your property for fair market value, which would cover your debts with a small amount left over for you and your wife to start fresh elsewhere. Cole did this. He forged those documents. Careful, Mr. Hayes. That's a serious accusation with legal consequences if you can't prove it. Sykes' smile was cold. You have 30 days to pay the full amount or accept Mr. Cole's generous offer. I'd think very carefully about which option serves your interests best. Callum rode home in a daze, the forged documents burning in his saddlebag like hot coals. When he told Alara what had happened, she went pale, but stayed calm, immediately pulling out their own copies of the loan paperwork for comparison. These are forgeries, she said after an hour of careful examination. Good ones, but forgeries. Look here. The ink is slightly different, and the signature doesn't quite match. But proving it, she shook her head. That would require experts, lawyers, time we don't have. So we're finished. Cole finally found a way to beat us that we can't fight. No. Alara's voice was steel. We're not finished. We just need to think differently. She stood and began pacing, her mind clearly racing. He's made a mistake. He's shown his hand too clearly. The shop closures, the sudden discovery of errors, the convenient buyout offer. It's too obvious, too coordinated. Even people who were neutral before will see this as the overreach it is. Seeing it and doing something about it are different things. Cole owns this town now. He owns the businesses in this town. He doesn't own the people. Alara grabbed her shawl. Come on, we're going visiting. Over the next 3 days, they rode to every ranch in the valley, showing the forged documents, explaining Cole's scheme, asking for help. The response was overwhelming. Every rancher they visited was outraged, and more importantly, every one of them was willing to act. This is bigger than just you now, Thomas Gray said bluntly. If Cole can do this to you, he can do it to any of us. He needs to be stopped, permanently. Miguel was even more direct. We gather evidence, we take it to the territorial governor, and we make sure Cole never threatens another honest rancher again. But that takes time. What do you need right now? $800 in 30 days, Callum said, which is impossible. Not impossible, difficult. Miguel looked around at the assembled ranchers. They'd gathered at his ranch to discuss strategy. If each of us contributes what we can, we might raise enough to meet the payment. Then, while Cole thinks he's lost this round, we build our legal case and take him down properly. We can't ask you all to risk your own money, Alara began. You're not asking, we're offering. Martha Chen spoke up from her seat. You stood up for this valley when no one else would. Now it's our turn to stand up for you. In the end, they raised $760. Not quite enough, but close. Callum and Alara sold their breeding bull back to the man they'd bought him from, taking a loss but raising the final $40 they needed. We'll buy another bull later, Alara said as they counted the money. Right now we stay solvent and keep fighting. On the 30th day, they walked into the bank with $800 in cash and a delegation of valley ranchers behind them. Sykes' face went white when he saw the crowd. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, I see you've decided to pay. In full, in cash with witnesses, Alara said crisply, placing the money on the desk. We'll need a receipt, of course, noting that this satisfies all outstanding debt on the disputed loan amount. Of course. Sykes counted the money with shaking hands, wrote out the receipt, and handed it over. One more thing, Alara continued. We're filing a formal complaint with the Territorial Governor's Office regarding fraudulent loan documents and business practices designed to coerce property sales through illegal means. These gentlemen are all prepared to testify about similar experiences with Mr. Cole's operations. That's not something I can address, Sykes stammered. We're not asking you to address it. We're informing you that it's happening. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Sykes? You might want to consider finding employment elsewhere. I suspect this bank will be under investigation very shortly. Outside, the ranchers erupted in cheers. They'd beaten Cole again, publicly this time, and with witnesses. But as they rode home, Callum felt uneasy. He won't let this stand, he said to Alara. $800 is nothing to him. We embarrassed him, and men like Cole don't forgive that. I know, which is why we need to end this once and for all. That night, they wrote a detailed letter to the territorial governor, outlining every illegal action Cole had taken, every rancher he'd targeted, every document they'd gathered. Miguel hand-delivered it personally, riding 3 days to the territorial capital to ensure it arrived safely. 2 weeks later, a federal marshal arrived in town, accompanied by an auditor from the territorial office. Cole, confident in his power and his ability to intimidate local authorities, hadn't counted on federal intervention. The investigation was swift and thorough, and what they found was damning: forged loan documents, bribes to local officials, intimidation and threats, even evidence of the hired guns who'd stampeded Callum and Alara's cattle. Cole had been so sure of his untouchability that he'd kept detailed records of everything, the better to manage his expanding empire. The day they arrested Barrett Cole, half the town turned out to watch. He was led out of his mansion in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence, still threatening everyone with lawsuits and political connections. But his power had been broken, and everyone knew it. Callum and Alara watched from the crowd, her hand tight in his. "It's really over," she whispered. "Yeah, it really is." The aftermath took months to sort out. Cole's businesses were sold to pay restitution to the ranchers he'd defrauded. The bank got new management that was actually interested in supporting the community rather than exploiting it. And slowly, the valley began to heal from years of living under Cole's shadow. For Callum and Alara, life settled into a rhythm that was almost peaceful. Their ranch thrived, the expanded pastures producing hay that they sold for good profit, the cattle herd growing steadily. They paid off their loan 2 years early and actually started saving money for the first time in Callum's life. But the real miracle came one spring morning 2 years after Cole's arrest, when Alara woke Callum with tears streaming down her face and a trembling hand pressed to her belly. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "Callum, we're going to have a baby." He pulled her close, his own eyes wet, and felt the last broken piece of his heart heal completely. This was everything he'd ever wanted: family, partnership, a future built on hope rather than desperation. Their daughter was born in January during a snowstorm that shut down the valley for 3 days. Rosa Santos served as midwife, her capable hands guiding the baby into the world, while Callum paced the main room and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. When he finally held his daughter, tiny and red-faced and perfect, he counted her fingers twice to make sure they were all there, then looked at Alara with wonder. "She's beautiful. You're both beautiful." "She has your eyes," Alara said, exhausted but glowing. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at this new life they'd created, Callum knew. "Hope. Her name is Hope." Alara smiled through happy tears. "Hope Hayes. It's perfect." The years that followed were full and rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. 2 more children came, a son they named Thomas after Alara's father, and another daughter named Catherine, a gesture of forgiveness and moving forward that surprised them both. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley, known for quality stock and fair dealing. Miguel became Hope's godfather and taught all the children to ride before they could barely walk. Carlos married a girl from Silver Creek and brought her back to the valley, building his own ranch on land his uncle gifted him. Martha Chen's daughter married the new bank manager's son, and their wedding brought together families that had once been divided by Cole's influence. The valley prospered, and at the center of that prosperity were Callum and Alara Hayes, whose story had become legend, the struggling cowboy and the unwanted bride who'd fought their way to happiness against impossible odds. On their 10th anniversary, Callum presented Alara with a gift he'd been working on for months. It was a silver locket, beautifully crafted by the new silversmith in town, and inside were 2 polished silver dollars mounted behind glass. "The original $2, he explained as she stared at them in wonder. "I kept them all these years, had them polished and preserved. Thought you should have them." Alara pressed the locket to her heart, tears streaming down her face. "This was the beginning, the day you spent everything you had on someone nobody wanted. Best money I ever spent, best decision I ever made." He pulled her close. "You know what's funny? At the time, I thought I was saving you, but you saved me just as much. Maybe more." "We saved each other," she corrected, kissing him softly, "and we built something beautiful from absolutely nothing." That evening, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over land that had nearly broken them, but instead had made them stronger. Their children played in the yard, Hope teaching Thomas to skip stones while baby Catherine toddled after them on unsteady legs. Inside the expanded cabin, dinner waited on a table that sat 12 comfortably, built to accommodate the family and friends who regularly filled their home with laughter and life. "Tell me again," Hope called out, running up to the porch. "Tell me the story about the $2. It was her favorite story, one she never tired of hearing. Alara pulled their eldest daughter into her lap and began the tale they'd told 100 times, about an auction block and a desperate cowboy and a woman who refused to break even when the whole world was against her. "Your father spent his last money on me," Alara said, her voice warm with memory. $2 silver for a bride nobody wanted." "But he wanted you," Hope interrupted, knowing her part in the story. "He did. He saw something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. He gave me hope when I had none." "And Mama gave Papa hope too," Thomas added, joining them on the porch. And together they beat the bad man and saved the ranch and lived happily ever after. We're still living it, Callum said, ruffling his son's hair. Every day we choose each other is another part of the happy ending. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Callum and Alara stood together in the moonlight, looking out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Do you ever regret it? Callum asked quietly. Coming here, marrying me, everything that followed? Not for a single second. You gave me the one thing I'd lost in Boston, purpose. The chance to be more than decorative, more than someone's burden. You let me be strong. You were always strong. I just gave you space to show it. She turned to face him, the moonlight catching in her dark eyes. We were both broken when we found each other, but we took those broken pieces and built something whole, something lasting. Something worth more than $2, Callum agreed with a smile. Worth everything, Alara corrected. Worth all the struggle, all the fear, all the times we nearly lost it all. Because it led us here, to this moment, to this life we've built together. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned every line and shadow of each other through years of partnership and love. The ranch was quiet around them, cattle settled for the night, horses dozing in the barn, the irrigation channel they'd fought so hard for making its constant music as water flowed to the southern pastures. You know what I think about sometimes? Alara said softly. I think about that girl on the auction block, so scared and alone, certain her life was over. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was about to begin, that the man who bid $2 would give her the world. And I think about that desperate rancher who thought spending his last money on a stranger was the craziest thing he'd ever done. Callum pulled her closer. I wish I could tell him it was the sanest, smartest, most important decision of his life. We wouldn't believe it if we could tell ourselves. We'd think it was too good to be true. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things in life are the ones we can't imagine until they happen. Alara lifted the locket still hanging around her neck, opening it to look at the $2 silver gleaming in the moonlight. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? You said we just needed to keep standing, to not give up. And you said standing was all you had left. We're still standing. All these years later, all these challenges we've faced, we're still here, still together, still fighting for what matters. Still winning, Callum added. Against all the odds, we're still winning. From inside the house came the sound of baby Catherine crying, and they both smiled. Hope's voice followed a moment later, singing the lullaby Alara had taught her, soothing her little sister back to sleep. That's our legacy, Alara said, wonder in her voice. Not just the land or the ranch or even beating Barrett Cole. It's those 3 children who'll grow up knowing that love and partnership and refusing to quit can overcome anything. That's what we built with $2 and stubborn hope. And they'll tell their children, who'll tell theirs, and maybe someday someone will need to hear that story. Someone standing on their own auction block, certain their life is over, not knowing that their whole future is about to begin with someone willing to take a chance on them. That's a good story to pass down. It's our story, and I wouldn't change a single word of it. They went inside together, checking on each sleeping child, Hope with her dark hair spread across her pillow, Thomas clutching the wooden horse Callum had carved him, Catherine thumb in mouth and dreaming whatever babies dream. In the main room, the fire had burned down to embers, and Alara banked it for the night while Callum locked the door. In their bedroom, they undressed without speaking, the comfortable silence of 2 people who no longer needed words for everything. As they lay together in the darkness, Alara's head on Callum's shoulder in the position that had become theirs, she spoke one last time. Thank you for the $2. Thank you for being worth every penny and more. We did good, didn't we? With this life we built? We did great, Callum confirmed. We took nothing and made everything. We took broken and made whole. We took desperate and made it into joy. The $2 miracle, Alara whispered, already half asleep. The best bargain of my life, Callum agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the valley in white, blanketing the ranch that had nearly died but instead had flourished. The cattle were safe in the shelter, the horses warm in the barn. The irrigation channel would freeze and thaw and flow again come spring. And in the cabin that had once housed only loneliness and defeat, a family slept peacefully, secure in the love and partnership that had been forged from nothing more than $2 silver and the courage to hope. Years later, when people asked about the locket Alara never took off, she would open it and show them the 2 polished coins inside. And she would tell them about a cowboy who spent his last money on faith, about a woman who refused to break, about a love that grew from desperation into something that sustained them through every trial and triumph. "This was our beginning," she would say, holding the locket close to her heart. $2 and a whole lot of hope. And it turned into more than I ever dreamed possible. And Callum, standing beside her as he always did, would add with a smile, "Best investment I ever made, worth every penny and then some." Because some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. Some things, partnership, love, the life built from nothing but determination and faith, are priceless. And sometimes, when you're willing to risk everything on hope, when you refuse to give up even when every reasonable person would quit, when you find the one person who will stand beside you no matter what comes, sometimes $2 is enough to change everything. Sometimes $2 can buy a miracle. And in a small valley in Montana, on a thriving ranch filled with life and love and laughter, that miracle lived on in the family that had been born from it, in the legacy of 2 people who'd learned that the best things in life aren't the ones that come easy. They're the ones worth fighting for, together, no matter the cost. The $2 miracle, they called it in the valley. The story of Callum and Alara Hayes, who proved that sometimes the smallest investment of faith can yield the richest returns, and that love built on mutual respect and shared struggle can weather any storm. And on quiet winter nights, when the snow fell soft and the fire burned warm, they would hold each other close and remember that auction block, that moment of decision, those $2 that had bought them not just each other, but a whole future full of possibilities. Their story, once born from desperation and uncertainty, had become a testament to hope itself. A reminder that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, that worth isn't measured in dollars, and that the courage to take a chance on someone when everyone else has given up might just be the most valuable thing you can offer. $2, polished and preserved in a locket, carried close to Alara's heart always. A reminder of where they'd started, of how far they'd come, of what they'd built together from absolutely nothing. The beginning and the proof, forever intertwined. The $2 miracle that had grown into a lifetime of love.